up-close and personal version. Silvana has introduced our expert panel today, so I'm not going to repeat that so that we can catch up on a little bit of time, because I know that that is of the essence. And as an autistic adult, I do like to keep to time so very much. So I will do my best to do so. So today we're talking about including the voice of our children in their lives, big decisions and little, and how that works in reality. And the diversity of the panel of experts we have here today is great. We have parents, we also have Kylie Ann is autistic with ADHD, Marlena has cerebral palsy. So we're going to talk from many different perspectives. You've heard a little bit from Jordan already, and Jodie from a therapist perspective, from a professional perspective. So Kylie Ann, I'd like to start with you, if that's okay, put you on the spot. What do we actually mean when we talk about including the voice of our children? What's this panel really about?
Okay. When I was asked to be on this panel, I have two autistic children as well. One is 11 and one is 12. So the first thing I did was ask them what they thought it meant, because we're talking about their voice, not mine. And I'm actually going to read from this directly because it's a direct quote from my child. Okay, my 11-year-old said he was way too busy making money to answer the question, but my 12-year-old wrote the following: children should be included in the decision-making process as it prepares us for adulthood and helps us to make decisions for ourselves. We develop our independence and problem-making skills at a young age, much younger than you think. And at that stage, her head kind of spun around and she glared at me. I keep saying she's 10 and she gets very angry. And by actively listening and giving us boundaries and opportunities to make decisions, we learn right from wrong, develop morals and learn about failure. My brother and I are not robots, but we are independent thinkers. And that's exactly what my children are, and that's pretty much what everyone else in this room is. To me, this panel is really about Mel, bringing together organisations, people with lived experience who don't view disability through a medical model. We don't see ourselves as less than. We don't see that we need to treat ourselves or the child, that we are broken or faulty or less than. And you will hear that quite often. We do see disability through the social model, whereby the focus is on the changes or adjustments to set up our children for success. And this model demands that children or adults are seen as individuals and our opinions and thoughts are taken on board. For some of you, this may be your first presentation and even your first time meeting an autistic adult. Your children do grow up. So my hope is that your takeaway of the what is that autistic adults, we are supporting you to support your children through a child-centric parenting approach. And the way to do that is to listen to your children and have open and free communication at all times. The times my children have communicated their biggest needs was never verbally, and my children are verbal. So you need to find different ways to listen to your children because they are talking to you.
Fabulous. I couldn't have said it better myself. Mello, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, look, a lot of it's going to mirror what you were just sharing. But I think for me, at the core is the concept of independence. I've been involved in workshops and talks around inclusion, family leadership, but the what to me is the independence of our children and the confidence for our children and the role that we play as parents, especially in those early formative years. The more that we can incorporate, and as you say, it's not just verbal, they're communicating to us from a very early age. And if we can be aware of what they're communicating so we can include them in so their individuality, their personality is being represented, and they're given the opportunity then to be able to do that as they're growing older. I think at the core it's the independence of our children, and that's going to lead to inclusion and being able to have the confidence to be able to voice their opinions and their desires to us. That's, to me, the what is the independence.
Fabulous. Okay, to our next question, I'd like to actually ask Marlena and Kylie Ann, because you both have a lived experience of disability. And I'll start with you, Marlena. Can you tell us why we should bother? Like, what's the point of including our children? We've sort of heard from Mello that there's a lot about independence, but even when they're young, why are we bothering to do this?
Basically, children are a future. In the future, if we want an inclusive generation, it starts with the children now. I am so biased with my inclusive education views and unapologetic in this. You are never too young to include, the younger the better. In my case, having people who supported and listened to me as kid was major in me having an inclusive life now. With my schooling, I was lucky that I had a great team of people who listened to my mother, and I, by having a tight-knit group, allowed me go out and have that inclusive life in my post-school life. Young people also can teach us older people so much. Listening to them often will solve some of our issues or concerns with perceived problems inclusion may encounter. Kids rock, and it's us as adults that need to relearn what inclusion is and what it is not. We should bother because at the end of the day our communities are stronger and better for all of us, and we are inclusive of not just disability but many diverse groups. Naturally, I come from a disability perspective, but the word inclusion is a holistic term, and for me disability is only one part of this.
Kylie-Anne, do you want to add some?
I was 35 when I had my children, so it's always a concern that without having a big family that there won't be people around to look after them when I go. So it's very important to me that they are independent and they learn their own skills. I don't know if Mel mentioned, but I'm the co-founder of the Autistic Realm Australia, and we shout it to the hilltops. All behaviour is communication, presume competence at all times. And you must do that with your children. They may think differently. I mean, my kids think so much out of the square, it's not funny. And traditional education for them is a bit of a minefield. But if I don't teach them how to think at home and make decisions at home, how can I expect them to go to school and advocate for themselves? I'm not there 8 hours a day. We need to listen to them, but we actually need to actively listen, give them choices, and actually take it seriously. I mean, some of the decisions my children have made, 24/7 PlayStation, well, that's not going to happen. But I took it seriously at the time and I explained to them, and it comes back to, sorry, I can't remember your name. Is it Michael? Yeah. Michael said it's respect. How can you expect your children to respect you or anyone else if you don't have that basic fundamental respect for your kids?
Again, couldn't have said it better. Both of you, fabulous. Mello, can you give us some practical examples? Because obviously we're a room full of mostly parents. Practical examples of the how. So I think we've kind of covered the what. So how are some of the ways we can include our children's voices? Maybe therapy, home, activities, community?
Thank you. The how is really interesting because I think there's that concept where we're listening to our children's voices and trying to identify what it is that they want. In my instance, my daughter's got an intellectual disability and some physical challenges as well. So in the very early years, I was doing everything. And then somebody asked me, have you given her the choice to choose what she wants to wear? And that was a really significant point. And so that first instance of letting her voice be heard and being represented in what she wanted to do was a critical point. So it's about being involved in the therapies so we know what's working in the therapies and the partnerships that we're having with our professionals. And this concept of our children will show us, will tell us what to do. Fast forward now, what are we doing in terms of the community? Victoria is a very social little girl. So what I do now is I know she thrives in those environments. And I try a couple of times a week to take her to our local shopping centre. She'll stop and say hello to everyone. And I mean nearly just about everyone. But she loves that. And she thrives and grows in those interactions. And it's in knowing that and being in rooms like this and hearing what other people are doing. Yeah, Nicole sitting here in front of me, I remember her sharing, taking Harry to buy his chips and being part of the community and part of the things that our children want to do. So they'll see what we are doing and they want to do it. So if we include them, actively include them by listening, but then involving them, I think that that's when we start to see significant change.
Jodie, can you tell us a little bit about how you can do that in a therapy context? Because I think many of the parents here today will have their children in different kinds of therapies or interventions, and what is it that we can do to make sure that we hear our children's voice in that context?
Thank you. A big part, I think, of what happens, in therapy and, as a speech pathologist, so much of the work that I do is guided by children, and a huge part of it is about communication partner strategies. So what do we as communication partners need to do to really honour the voice of children and listen to the voice of children, be aware of their voice, because they express their voice in many different ways. And so many of the things that we do, and it's going to sound really, really simple, but we just can't underestimate the power of just, these things that we can just subtly tweak, or, as Melo was talking about too, just becoming aware of. So it's about observing. And so much of what I do, what we do with families and in preschools and with teachers and all sorts of people in the community, it's about, being aware. Who is this person? Who is this little person? What do they like? How are they showing us that they like this? How are they showing us that they don't like something? That's really powerful as well. And really acknowledging that and attaching meaning to it. It's about waiting, the power of pausing. So, and really stepping back and giving children a chance, because, all children, it can take time, and we need, I think, in this very busy world, we're often quick to kind of make decisions and rush in, and everyone's keen to help, but it's about sitting back and giving time, and really looking and seeing what children are telling us. It's about listening. It's about checking in with children all the time, having these explicit triangular discussions between the child, might be the therapist, it might be a parent, whoever else is in their team, checking in. Are we on the right track? Is this working for you? Is this, right for you? It's about making language accessible. Okay, so language comes in many forms. Some of us, we express our language through our speech, but for some, speech may not be the most efficient way of communicating. So, children from very early on, from the very beginning, need access to language. They need access to help them understand language and understand what is happening. They need access to be able to use that language to express themselves. So, really, I think spreading the word and being advocates about all the different ways that people communicate in all the different things that they do. And I think it's another thing is about really acknowledging the environment too. So that is so important, because children react in different environments in a different way, and it's about making sure that children have what they need in the environments that they're in to have their voice heard. And so I'm always so grateful for when parents are communicating these things with me all the time, and thinking about, watching and, listening to what their children are telling them, and how can we make this better, how can this be better for next time?
Sorry. That just prompted another thought that I wanted to share, that concept of stepping back and listening. as a parent, there are points and stages in our child's journey and development where we have to actually step back and relinquish the things that we were doing for them. And that can sometimes be difficult. It can sometimes be scary. But I'm learning more and more when Victoria's showing that she has capacity. The way we're going to get confidence is when I step back more. I'm there to support and help her and guide her, but her voice will be at its strongest when she's doing it as much as she can, as often as she can. So that stepping back as a parent is critical, because we want them to, from an independence point of view, that's how we're going to help them develop that.
Jordan, you help us as parents to sort of set up our children with support workers, and maybe a number of us are probably a bit young for that yet, but eventually that would be an ideal situation, so that they can experience sort of independence away from the home and from their parents. I think one of my concerns as a parent is how I can ensure that my children's voices are heard when I'm not around. Can you talk to us a bit about that?
Thank you. And I guess I bring an interesting perspective, not as a parent, but as a sibling of someone with a disability. And might just say my brother passed away a few years ago, so it's sort of for me now it's sort of really from that sibling perspective, but then trying to sort of look at the system. I think a really interesting concept for me. The first thing I just wanted to reflect on. And I see this in friends of mine who are parents of children with disabilities. I hear it a lot from my parents that when they started out on this journey with my little brother, it was so overwhelming and so intimidating, and there was like a sector, and there were sort of experts and professionals, and really what my mum talks a lot about is really leaning into this idea of backing herself, and for my dad, backing themselves. Often, in the early days, they really understood what we needed as a family, and really I think that's an interesting idea. And when you think about the idea, and this is sort of quite horrifying to me, but when I talk to my mum, my brother was born in 1989, right? So not that long ago in most of our lifetimes, and my grandparents' attitude to my parents was like, oh, that's okay, you just put him away. And that's a horrifying idea, that in our lifetime, the institutionalisation of my grandparents' time, and of course it's not their fault, that's the sort of time that they were brought up in. But when you think about just how far we are progressing away from just in the late 80s, these ideas of like institutionalisation, to this time where we are now, where the system used to tell us, this is how things were done, and we didn't have much choice as either as individuals with disabilities or as families. Now in 2019, we have so much more choice. And we're so much more empowered and to back ourselves and to back the ideas that we think are right for our people. And so I think in listening to our own gut feeling as families, really listening and backing the voice of our young people, now is the time really philosophically for that. I guess when I reflect on my family experience, one of the challenges, I had a wonderful upbringing, and I hope I tried to illustrate that, but one of the challenges that, I guess looking back, my dad threw himself so much into the support of my brother that was quite insular, and I think my mum was a great advocate, especially as Shane started to get a bit older, was to say, listen to Shane's voice. Actually, it's time to start taking risks and let Shane go out and have a crack. And I'll never forget when we were in England, the first support worker, my mum went down to the local shops and she wrote a little job ad for a support worker, and this lovely young lady named Philippa turned up. And I'll never forget the expression on my brother's face when he went out for the first time with a support worker out, into his own life and to access his own life away from the family. And I think it's just not potentially, and again, I don't talk from the perspective of a parent that knows, but sort of from my perspective as a sibling, really understanding that you've got to get that balance right of like when we back ourselves and know what's best for our person, but not to overdo that and to really sort of see as our person starts to develop the ways that you can connect to live a sort of a broader and better life. And I guess really when I think about that question of when we're not around as family members or whatever for our young person, they have to stand on their own, in the world. They have to be able to go out and advocate for themselves and to really stride into the life that they want to set for themselves. So I feel like it's a really important concept for us to get that balance right of backing ourselves and knowing the best for our people, but also really knowing sort of how to support someone to get out and to listen to them to what they want to do in their life, and how do we support and make that happen.
Jodie, I'd love to hear again from you, just from a therapy perspective. Is there things that we can be doing to support our kids to self-advocate in those kinds of contexts? Because eventually, obviously, we do want them to be the independent people who can go out with their support workers or whatever else. What can we be doing as parents and in therapy sessions to make that happen?
I think, again, children really show us about what we can be doing and what we need to be doing, and one of those things, when we're thinking about, children are showing preferences for the type of communication they would like to use, or what is helpful for them, and it's about then all of us getting on board and using that and using that ourselves when we're communicating. So if they've got a speech generating device, or whether it be a picture, using a book with some picture communication symbols or keyword signs or whatever it may be, but we all use those methods for, so it's not just for the child, that we're all using it, so that really validates it for that child. So many times when I go into preschools and schools, I know it's spot on and it's working when you go in, and it's not a system that's kind of tucked away and they see me as a speech therapist and they bring it out. It's there, it's accessible, peers are using it, everyone is using it, teachers are using it, and it's visible, it's there, and it's just part of. It's doing what it's meant to be doing, and and that child is able to have all those experiences. So I think really learning a lot about the different ways that children are communicating and taking that on ourselves. I also think children quite like to when maybe going into somewhere new, so say starting preschool or playgroup or school, a book about me. This is me. And children actively involved. Do they want a book? I've known children, where they've said, no, I don't want that, and that's fine. But for other children who do, yes, I want people to know about me, and for them to have an active voice in what goes in that book, what photos, what graphics, what descriptions, and I also think too, I often think about, what do children think of, all these therapists coming in and out of their lives, and I'm always very mindful too about, what are they thinking about, who am I? And so, sharing information too about ourselves and, for children, so that it's not just someone coming in and, it's about, respecting that. And I think, children's voices too, I think, parents often, will feedback too that, that children's voices are different when they're in different settings too. Often their voices in schools and preschools and out and about is different than at home. And I think it's, so important to just keep those lines of communication open between, families, teachers, therapists. So, all that knowledge is being shared, and, because it's quite different and illuminating. And I think a big thing too is just getting feedback from children, what's useful, what do you need, and really making sure too that, I think is so important too is how children are saying, no, I don't like it, stop, because it may not be using those words, it might be, through behaviours that are labelled as problem behaviours, or, we've all heard those terms, but they do carry so much powerful communicative intent, and, we really need to, be children's champions in helping everybody understand and acknowledge and respect that. Yeah.
Sorry, I was... Mello distracted me. Yes, look, I mean, I think Jodie's just come up with a few really good points, and I know that as the chair I'm not meant to kind of jump in, but anyone who knows me also knows that I can't possibly hold my tongue when I have something to say. So, and I've got the microphone now, so I think there are 2 points that Jodie made there that are so important. One is that idea of making sure that your child's communication, however they communicate, is just normal. It's just, everybody communicates in different ways. Whatever body language they choose to use, whatever communication device they need to use, that is just normal, that those sorts of differences, communication differences, are normal. And this is kind of my passion project at the moment, is this idea that we normalise all the differences in the world so that everyone can just accept that everybody is different, and that's okay, and so different is normal. So that's really important. But I think also as parents, we often like our children, and certainly maybe our schools teachers like our children to be compliant and to say yes and to do what they're told. But actually our job as parents is to teach them to say no if they want to. And that may not be powerful now, and it may be really inconvenient at times. But when they're older, particularly when they're older, that's a very important thing for them to know, that they have the bodily autonomy and the respect for themselves as a whole person to be able to say no when they don't want something. And that's such an important skill, and I think particularly for our kids we need to, and for me as an adult, and I'm going to speak on Kylie Ann's behalf as well, and I'm not sure about Marlene, she can speak for herself, but I think knowing that we can say no to things is not necessarily a skill that comes easily. So it's our job as parents to make sure that we know it's okay to say no, and we don't have to be compliant at all times. Marlene, I'm going to come to you now. I think some of our parents might be thinking that their children are too young. They might have very young children. We've talked about non-traditionally communicating children, or children who use different ways of communicating. But I know that parents do find it more challenging if their child doesn't speak to be able to understand what they're trying to say. So can you talk to us about how parents of young or non-traditionally communicating children might be able to hear and include their child's voice?
As someone who is non-verbal and use multi-forms of communication, I am a firm believer we all can communicate. We all just need to be open to all forms of communication. Being non-verbal has taught me a good listener. There is something in learning the art of listening in this day and age. We live in a world of social media and a fast-paced society. Hearing a child in particular isn't something we will learn overnight, and also not something a professional such as a speech therapist can give you the answers. There are some amazing professionals out there, but one does not have to be a professional to understand or listen to someone. We are all professionals in this regard. It's a hard question to answer, but I would say try different things and be open to all forms of communication. Don't engage too much with social media chat groups that can get heated without that personal connection. Remember, parents, you are the professional first and foremost. Take advice by all means. But stand firm with your connection with your child and keep your eyes on your vision and perceptions. Your child may be young, your child may be non-verbal, but there are ways and means to get the message out there. There are many cases of people who may be non-verbal getting on with life and doing their thing.
And we're going to hear a bit later on tech providing. We have an amazing video from another non-speaking 11-year-old girl who's done a self-directed documentary that we're launching today, and that will give a sort of similar perspective, I think, to what Marlena has just talked about. Jordan, did you have anything you wanted to add to, young children non-communicating from your sibling perspective or from your work perspective?
I guess maybe just on a slight tangent, and this thought's only just come to mind, so we'll see where we end up. But and just off the back of what Marlena was saying, I know a big piece that Savannah and I discussed was the power of self-direction and self-management. And I know, I'm not sure if people are sort of self-directing and self-managing much, but again, just back to that historical idea that we didn't often have a chance. And one of the ways to express ourselves and our voice and what we want to achieve from, when a person's very young to as they grow is to be more self-directed and self-managed in that way. And as I say, that hasn't always been the case. Historically, you haven't always had that opportunity. When we were growing up in the UK, we were one of the first families over there in early 2000 to get this self-directed funding, and with that funding, we were able to go down and, as I said, Shane was able to go and find a support worker that could help him go out and into his life, and really that was the point at which his voice started to lift. And so I guess just that general comment around the power of self-direction, self-management. I think it's only it's a small percentage, I forget what it is, of the NDIS right now who are self-managing their funding packages. 24%? Yeah, so it's 24% fully self-managing, and I guess it's just a really interesting thing for us to consider over the next 10 or so years is how we as families and individuals step into that idea to really self-manage. Because I think if you look back at disability services over the last 10 years as a way to think what disability services will look like in the next 10 years, you've fundamentally made a mistake. The future's going to look very, very different, and it's really by embracing the voices of the individual and of the family through this idea of sort of self-management and self-direction. I think the future's going to look very, very different. The last thing I would just say is, I think, and hopefully with a sort of positive note, is things are changing now. One of the thoughts that came to my mind, I'm sitting on the board of the New South Wales Public Service Commission, which is the body that represents the 400,000 people in the New South Wales Public Service, and the employment rate of people with disabilities is only 2.5%, and it's been going backwards over the last couple of years. And one of the reasons that I'm on there is because I'm furiously passionate about we need more people with disabilities employed. And it's really incredible seeing up to the level of the Premier, who's just put one of her priorities is to employ more people with disabilities. The focus on especially people with sort of neurodiversity and what that can add to the workforce is a really exciting future. So I guess just as parents with young people, as I say, the future is going to look very, very different. It's with these concepts of self-management and self-direction that we get to, if we can really lean into listening to the voice of our young person, who that person is, rather than in the past with sort of one-size-fits-all model. I guess what I want to say is we're just living in a very different time. The future I think is going to look very, very different to the last 10 years, and that's why this conversation is so important around how do we back ourselves, but also then work with the services around us to really embrace that idea of self-determination.
That's an excellent point. I hadn't thought about my children actually self-managing at some point, but they will be they have a very loud voice, so they will be good at that. So what I'm going to do, I've got one final question, and then we can open the questions to the floor. So if you have any questions, maybe you just might want to think about it. We'll run a mic around, will we? Possibly, or maybe you'll just need to do a little bit of voice projection. So I'm just going to do our final sort of set question. And I'd like to return to you, Mello and Kylie Ann. I suppose as parents, how do we ensure that our children are genuine? We've talked a lot in the last panels about us leaning in and being CEOs of our children's teams. We've talked about the parents' role in the team. But how do we make sure that our children are genuinely integral members of their own teams? And how do we set them up for success so that, they do take over that CEO role as soon as they can, because it's their life and they belong as the CEO of their own life? So Mello, I'm going to give to you first.
Thank you. How do we make them integral as part of the team? I think that the sooner that we make them involved, genuinely involved and integral as early as possible, and give them the opportunities to make those choices and to be part of that is the only way that we're going to do that, whether it's with our children with a disability or a delay or our neurotypical children. The more that we expose them to being able to make decisions, no matter what those decisions end up being in terms of the outcome, the more experience that they're going to have, the more confidence that they're going to have in making decisions, and then the more they're going to believe in themselves. So planning is critical, obviously, and a lot of us here that have gone through the Now and Next program understand the power of a vision. The vision gives us the focus where we can address the attention that we're going to go towards. The other thing is that we need to be I suppose, agile in what we're doing, being flexible in what we're going to do. I look at my plan now and I think I've got a 5-year plan, and I think, well, why can't we get there in a year? And why does a 5-year plan have to really look like getting to that point in 5 years? So I'm seeing Victoria change quickly, so I have to change with her, for her. And that's really just seeing what she's doing and involving her more and more. And the more I do that, the more that she's going to be able to lead her team, hopefully, in the future.
Okay, Kylie-Anne, I'm going to give the last word to you.
Okay, this is back to my 12-year-old again. The reason is because she told me it's actually a United Nations mandate that you have to listen to the voice of the child. And in our house, we like rules. So therefore, I have to listen. We try and do things out of the square. We don't have family meetings, we have a family court session where we have a gavel, we have a jury, we have lawyers, and everyone gets they get to present their case. And again, whether it's lollies at 12 o'clock, which is never going to happen, but we go through the whole process, we treat them with respect and dignity and explain why that is not going to happen. With choices, we're not saying give your kid carte blanche, let them decide everything, because that's just crazy. But you give them choices when they're young that you can control. So you don't care what the outcome is. Do you want a Vegemite sandwich or a peanut butter? Either way, there's no right or wrong answer. And you involve your children in the process from the beginning, so when they can make decisions and ready to make decisions on their own, they don't crumble. It is very dangerous to not let your children make decisions. And I'll give you an example. When my daughter was 9, we're in Kmart and she had birthday money and all she wanted was dinosaur Lego. 45 minutes later, my husband's not a very patient man. He's screaming, just pick the friggin' Lego. My daughter crumbled and I watched her just disappear in front of my very eyes, and I swore then and there that she would never be a voyeur in her own life, that I would set her up for success to make her own decisions. I calmly took her aside, we went through all the choices, and in 5 minutes she picked a Lego and she was happy. But if we didn't have these failures and these examples, I don't want her to get to 20 and make such a fundamentally wrong decision because she never learned along the way. And if you don't teach your children, again, you're not presuming competence. You're pretty much saying to them, you are less than and you are not worthy. And damn well, my kids are bloody worthy and I'll fight for them every single day. We also, if you don't give them choices, they disappear. If you don't listen to them at 2, they're not going to tell you stuff at 16. Now, I have 2 children. One tells me everything and the other one will take her 6 days to get the information out. They both communicate to me in their own way. One last thing I'll add is, think about it. When your children are born, you listen to every noise they make. Why are they crying? Why are they doing this? And then they get to 10, you say, shut up. Never, ever, ever not listen to your children. I mean, I know we've got phones, we've all got this. I work full-time job, I sit on 2 boards, I've got 2 children, a property, we're all busy. But if it's just 5 minutes that you listen or watch the behaviour, why are they suddenly going off to their room or doing this, your children tell you everything you need to know.
I don't think I need to add anything to that. I think that's a perfect way. I was going to go on about presuming competence, but I'm not going to. We have a few minutes for questions, but not terribly long, so that we can keep to time, because I'm autistic and I like to keep to time. Are there any questions from the floor?
Hi. We've got a 10-year-old son who's in school, and he's been having trouble with his teacher wanting him to conform. What's the best way to approach that subject, to explain to her that he shouldn't have to conform?
My 11-year-old has been on partial enrolment since term 3 last year. He got suspended in kindergarten. I don't want him to conform, and if it comes to that stage, I will pull him out of school. Now, there are certain things he has to conform. He has to be respectful and he has to be polite. But in an inclusive education system, they would be identifying the triggers and helping him along the way so that he doesn't have to sit in there and conform. Someone like the playground is like Lord of the Flies. They send all our kids out there, there's no one watching them, and someone pinches our kid, punches them, or calls them horrible names, and it might be a day later that our children react. So my son last week punched someone and said a really horrible word, and they said, "Did you punch him?" He said, "Yes." Suspended. He came home, I said, "What happened before? What led to the punching?" He told me. I went to that school and I said, "He has not been suspended. You are not suspending my child, suspend the other one. He's the bully." You need to fight for your child, but one thing I will add is don't go in all guns blazing because the school will not listen to you. It depends if you're in a public school or a private school, unfortunately. I email my son's teacher if he hasn't slept and said, "Look, today's might not be a good day. I'm on call. I can pick him up." In a constant communication. That said, I don't want to know everything he does because I'll just go, "Oh no." But it's communication again with your teacher and your child. Does your child go to a private school or a public school? Okay, private school, it's a little bit different. But it depends on what they want to conform for. Is it a given? Is it something you can negotiate on? Or is it something he has to do? And I think that's what it comes down to is what is it he has to do? Is it like sitting down or? Okay, to me that's negotiable.
Yeah.
He's not swearing, he's not being disrespectful. My kid has a mini tramp at school, so after lunch, I paid for it myself. He goes and jumps on the trampoline because the transition from the playground to the classroom is too much. He has a beanbag that when he needs to take himself away, I've paid for that as well, but it's all negotiable stuff. Can he be disrespectful to the teacher? No. He can put up his hand or he will yell out.
I'm at the point where there was one incident which the school doesn't know about that brought me to tears, what the teacher did. Now, this is the only teacher I had problems with. The other teachers were great. They didn't cope well, but their hearts were in it. So I'm up to the point where I am going to bring up this card to the principal, bring an advocate, because basically this teacher's failed and she thinks she knows how to teach kids on the spectrum or challenge them. She has no clue. I've given feedback. It's a private school and they lawyer up. So I'm doing this for all kids. I'm waiting for this advocacy group, then I'll go in politely to the school and say XYZ, you're not living up to your reputation, what you say on your website, because they go diversity. They bring diversity, multicultural, but XYZ, politely, not coming all guns blazing. I wish I did.
Yeah. And I find them more open to talking to me.
Could I get maybe you to come and chat with Kylie Ann afterwards, and we'll take one more question because I can see Justine's got a question down there. So if that's all right with Kylie Ann, I'll get you two together afterwards.
Hi. I just wanted to add, I hear that so often from families when they've just called up to meeting after meeting after meeting, and it's all about things that are going wrong. This isn't happening. He or she is not doing this. They're not doing that. Blah 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 blah. And there was one particular mother that I do a lot of work with, and we had a conversation, and I said to her, have you asked them about what's going right? And she said, no. And I said, well, maybe, that might be a question to ask at the next time you're going to be, you get hauled up. And so she did. And that was actually a real game changer because it really just shifted. It just shifted the thinking. And everyone then, started to think about, oh, okay, yeah, what's going right? And there were lots of things going right. And, so the solution, well, let's do more of that, And that really shifted for this mum and for her little boy who was 9 at the time. So I guess they're things to think of too when you just pounded and pounded and pounded. you know, we come from a strengths-based approach, okay? It's about working with strengths and building from there, and, you know, and your child will help tell you who they need to, you know, to help them when they're there.
So, yes, so we're going to wrap up now. So can you help join me in silent applause to thank all our panellists today for their expert opinions. Thank you so much. And I'm going to hand that over to you.
And while I'm just concluding and just summarising that awesome panel, Nicole is going to help me to thank the panel and also Michael for his opening. But I've heard a few themes there. One was notice, expect, slow down, for communication for your child and listening to the voice of your child. The next theme was strengths. Focus on your child's strengths and interests, and your strengths, know them. Know those strengths and use those strengths in supporting your child to have a voice in your family and a voice in the community, including school. It's never too early to start including the voice of your child, but it does take time. So start now, while your children are little, to include their voice, to listen to their voice, to slow down, focus on them, put aside all the other things that are clouding your mind, and really focus in on what your child is trying to tell you, what your child is feeling. That will be our next presentation. And then finally, this afternoon, I'm so proud to say, we're going to present you with 4 young people who are going to express themselves for you so that you as parents see what it looks like when your children are going to grow up. Start nurturing, watering, fertilising their voices now so that in the future, when your children are adults, they're going to be heard and they will have a true voice. Thank you again. Please join me once again in thanking the panel.